Hi, everyone. Welcome to the How We Hustle podcast.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Tanya. And we invite you to join us in our unfiltered conversation about the real life hustle of being an entrepreneur. For more information about the podcast, check out howwehustlepodcast.com. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at How We Hustle Podcast, where you'll get notable quotes from our episodes and updates on live new episodes. So head over to Instagram and follow us at How We Hustle Podcast.
I'm really excited to introduce you guys to my guest today, Greg Faxon. Greg is an incredible coach for coaches who want to fill their client roster. He's also an amazing author and someone I now call a friend. I've been following Greg since before I was even a certified coach because of all the valuable resources he shares on his blog, in his book, and in his 5-Minute Friday emails. I'll leave the links for his website, his book, and his free gift in the show notes of this episode. Make sure to check them out at the end of the episode. He's brought with him his 21 ways to find potential clients completely for free. You can grab it in the show notes after this episode. Last week, I had Greg come into my Leap into Ladypreneurship group coaching program to speak about how to cultivate the motivation to achieve greatness like a world-class athlete. And it was so powerful, I had to have him come back and share his amazing advice with our podcast listeners. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Greg. Thanks for joining me. I'm so excited to have you. And we were just talking before, and we didn't want to miss anything. So I wanted you to focus on when you came into my group, you talked about like the daily habits and about the goal setting, which was a little bit different than what I would typically share with my clients. Like I usually am like big about like really big goals. And so I thought it was a really interesting perspective that you had a different take on it. So I'd love to hear you share that.
Sure. So, and thank you for having me, Tanya. So one thing that we talked about for your clients was it's very, I would say it's pretty in vogue to like all the manifestation stuff and the spiritual side of setting really big goals. And there's the idea of like shoot for the stars and you land on the moon. And there's definitely a place for that. There's definitely a place for that 10x type thinking of, if you're looking to just double something, and Dan Sullivan talks a lot about this. If you're looking to double something, you're like, all right, I'll work a little bit harder. I'll do it a little bit better. And it's an incremental change. But if you want to 10x something, now you have to expand your mind. It may be a whole different business model, right? You may not be able to enroll people just manually, right? You may need an automated process, et cetera. So that's helpful when you're thinking longer term, when you're thinking about strategy, when you're thinking about your business model. But it's not necessarily helpful in terms of day-to-day motivation, month-to-month motivation, because something happens when you have this goal that's so far away. It can be motivating, but for a lot of people on a daily basis, it's actually demotivating, right? We spend a lot of time comparing ourselves in that gap between where we're at and where we want to go. And so I've sometimes just found it helpful. Let's just get people into momentum. Let's get traction. And for myself too. So sometimes that means, if you're at 100,000 revenue, what if I got to 200,000 in revenue, right? And not, I'm at 100,000 revenue. How do I get to 7 figures? That might be a really great thing to think about strategically. But for this quarter or for this year, and this is a process I'm going through, which is why I'm using that example. It might just be more helpful to have that, well, let's double it and see, in the short term, if we can get there.
Yeah, I definitely thought that was really an interesting perspective because I had been breaking down the quarters with my clients, but I loved how even breaking it down further and breaking it down just the day, the week, and giving people achievable goals for those days. Like I talk about that a lot, but I didn't talk about it in the way that you kind of give people actual, like, what's the word? Cemented, concrete. That's it, not cement, concrete strategies and ways to focus on just one thing per day.
Right. And so even let's zoom out from here. And why do you even need to set quarterly metrics and do an annual review and all that? And right now, as we're doing the interview, we're just starting 2019 and we're going into the new year. And so as an entrepreneur, you don't have a boss. You don't have someone who's giving you guidelines, which is wonderful. And it puts it upon you to set up that structure. And without any structure, without any goals, you just kind of wake up and do the thing that feels urgent or do the thing that excites you. And there's definitely power to following your energy in the moment. But if you feel like, well, I don't know what to do week to week, then you need to have some goals. And so the goals give you direction. And then we need to look at what are the habits and processes days to days, because that's actually the actions that get you there. But for me, I'm kind of like a crazy person about this. So I have like an annual review process, and then I have a quarterly review process, monthly, weekly, daily review. And it's a little bit different for each one, but the main structure you want to be asking yourself to really zoom out and sort of get altitude on your business is what's gone well from the past quarter, the past year, what hasn't gone so well, and what have I learned? And then what am I working towards for the next year? And this is a very popular structure for like bloggers. A lot of people put out their annual reviews at this time, but it's helpful not just for an annual review, but for, a weekly review, for a monthly review, a quarterly review. Because the thing is, if you know what your 3 focuses are for the year, the quarter, now we can actually as coaches, it's like, okay, now we can actually coach the client, because now we have a context with which to give tactics or strategies. If you don't have that sort of rudder to your boat, you like watch a webinar and they're like, you should do Instagram. So now you're on that and you're just never getting traction on any strategy because you haven't. For my clients, I call it a hypothesis. I'm like, you should have made a hypothesis for the year. So for example, for me, I spent a lot of 2018 creating an evergreen funnel and trying to sell my course at a lower price point without me having to sell it over the phone, which was really nice. It worked. It was very refreshing. But this year, my hypothesis for my new revenue goals are, what if I just focus on it with, high-end clients, just strategy session, and really simplify in that way? So that's my hypothesis going into the year. And when you have a hypothesis, now you can line up all the little tactics that help you get there.
Yeah, I love that. And I just love really focusing on one thing, because you can focus on so many things, and you can hear so many people talking about something. Oh, you should be doing this. Oh, you should be doing that. And if you're not having a focus, if you don't have one hypothesis, or if you don't have some sort of path or focus even, then it's really easy to jump from one thing to the other. So it's nice to have that one focus and just keep bringing it back. And I love what you said, if you can share about even just like focusing on one thing for the year. And if that doesn't, like the dip thing that you shared, if you can share that example, that was amazing.
Sure. So bring me back to that. And there's one more point I want to make here, which is if you're listening to this interview at this point and you're making 50K or less in revenue in your business, at this point, it's not relevant for you. I'd rather see you not plan and do all these quarterly reviews. It's just going to get in the way of you getting out there and hustling and being, for example, if you're a coach, the main metric you need to focus on is how many free consults are you in, right? Because that's ultimately what's going to get you clients and make you money. So just focus on that. Don't do a whole planning thing. You're not really yet a CEO. It's good to start thinking like a CEO early, but really you're just getting traction, which is totally fine. We've all been there, but just focus on sales right now, right? Just what are the things that are going to book conversations for me? What are the ways I need to have the conversations to convert clients? And then how do I just do a great job with those clients, right? Marketing, sales, delivery, those 3 areas, and just do that, right? And if you're not a coach, figure out in your industry, what is the main driver of the business, just the revenue portion of the business, because that's just what you need to focus on so you can get a little space to be the CEO and think strategically. It's not a great use of your time until you're at, between 50 and 100K, you can start thinking about how do we get a little more strategic and deliberate. And then once you're Microsoft, it's almost all, the strategy work and the ideas and the planning and what do we really want to bet the company on this year is what Mark Zuckerberg and people like that are thinking. They're not spending time on sales calls and tweaking their funnel type of thing. So it's kind of goes on a spectrum. So we may end up talking more about different groups, but I just always want to make sure that people know who it's for when they're hearing me give an invitation or perspective. Because if you're listening to a lot of podcasts, which people do often when they're starting a business, you really need to be aware of like, is this relevant to me though? Right? Otherwise, you're gathering all this information and like 20% of it is actually relevant now. So you should just do that and come back to the other stuff when you really need it, because it may not be for your type of business or your stage of business.
So important, because I have to say, like, I'm an information gatherer. So I tend to like gather a ton of information out there and think, okay, like I need all of this stuff before I can get started. And I've learned through the process that actually you don't need all that information. You just need a little bit of information and to take action. And then you can actually develop your own research and information from taking action.
And here's what's brilliant to tie it back to something like a quarterly review. So I just did my quarterly review. This is kind of a freak show time in January because you do your annual review, your quarterly review, your monthly review, and you got to do all the reviews at the beginning because it's a new year, a new quarter, etc. So I spent like the last week just planning stuff. I was like, man, I should just probably get back into selling at this point. But it was important. It was like a good time to spend. But as you're doing your quarterly review, for example, a lot of my goals right now are just sales focused goals. And so as I go and see, okay, what book do I want to read this month, right? Or this week, or for me, it's what book do I want to read with my clients? We have sort of a book club where we read stuff together. And so I'm able to go and actually sort through what's relevant to my goals, right? So I get to choose things. And this is why things like law of attraction work, right? At the most fundamental, in my opinion, it's that idea of you've primed your brain to have a destination in mind. So there's so many stimuli that are out there in the world that you interact with every day. So you've just given yourself sort of a filter of like, hey, pay attention to this stuff, right? And that, for me, that's really why it works. So if that's true, then doing something like a quarterly review, now it can determine the information you do consume, the podcasts you do choose to listen to, the books you do choose to read. And that's really helpful because it helps you sort through all of that.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I never even thought about that, about how choosing the books that you are reading are relevant to your goals. That's an amazing nugget.
When I was listening to something, years ago about, so I think it was someone approaching Warren Buffett for a speaking gig, and they're like, "We'd love you to speak at our, annual event." And they're talking to his secretary at this point, or his assistant. Like, we're happy to bring Warren on for like $100,000. Right? So I was like, that's a pretty good speaking fee. It's like whatever, 30-minute talk. And she's like, "No, I'm sorry. He's not going to do it." And they're like, "All right, what about $500,000? And she's like, "You know what? Actually, Warren has these specific priorities this quarter, and speaking isn't one of them, so he's not going to do it." And they're like, "How about like $1 million?" Right? And she was like, "You don't understand. It's not one of his priorities this quarter." And I just found that so powerful, right? Like, no amount of opportunity could take him off of what he'd intentionally, proactively decided to do. And so many people are operating, so many of us, I won't even speak down to people, me as well, can operate from a reactive point of view. Oh, who just emailed me and said, do you want to be featured in this thing? It's like, when you take control and zoom out and do things like quarterly reviews, you know what to say yes or no to. And maybe you say no to all the reactive things because none of the things that are coming to you are what you want, which is totally fine too. And you're going to go make things happen based on the plan that you have.
Yeah. So I was literally just thinking while you were going through that we actually had that conversation about this podcast, because when we started the podcast 2 years ago, our goals were very different. Our businesses looked very different. And Mike and I had this conversation of, if we're going to continue with the podcast 2 years later, then it needs to fit into the things that we're doing going forward. And so that's actually how we planned out the episodes, and who we wanted to have on the episodes was, how is this related to the things that we are doing going forward in 2019? So I definitely think that if you're going to spend time on it, it has to fit in with the goals that you set for that quarter, especially if there's only 1 to 3 of them that you're focusing on that quarter. Like, how is that related and how does that tie into? And if it doesn't, then maybe you leave it for the next quarter. Maybe you do, even if it's a podcast, it could be like, I only do the podcast for this quarter. We tape all the episodes in that quarter, and et cetera. Right. So I love that.
Yeah. So you asked me to talk about the dip. So, and stop me if I'm doing the wrong dip or this isn't what you wanted me to say. So if you've done an annual review or you set some quarterly goals and you're listening to this, maybe it'd be helpful. We can even go through, do a sanity check of that stuff. So do you have too many, first of all? 3 is a great number for both for the year, the quarter. Do they kaleidoscope in on each other? Is the quarterly goals, are they based on the annual goals, right? Or did you introduce 3 new things? So now really you have 6 goals, right? So ideally it's based on the higher level goal. So monthly is based on quarterly is based on annually. If you can really get disciplined, there's power in focus. So you have the 3 goals. And I want you to ask yourself, first, what is the process by which these goals will come true? Right? Goals just give you a direction. James Clear talks a lot about habits. Goals give you a direction, which is wonderful, but it's the things we do consistently each day that determine what we get to create in our businesses. And so what is the process? Do you need to hire X consultant to help you with it? Do you have to have this daily habit that you're doing? What is going to go into that goal? And then once you look at that, if you can get the perspective of someone who's already achieved that, then that can be really helpful, because you can say, all right, this goal, whatever it is, and let's just use the example of getting from 6 to 7 figures. What's the dip in this goal? Like, what's the hard part where most people quit? And they're going to be able to tell you, right? So they can tell you, maybe it's like, well, for the 6-figure business, it was just you, right? So yeah, Tanya's mouthing people. So that's about what I was about to say. It was just you in the 6-figure business, you hustled. And I was like, you just can't do the 7-figure business, just you, right? So you're going to have to learn to hire. You're going to have to learn to empower people. You're going to have to learn to deal with when they mess up. So, and they might have that as a dip. And you'll be like, all right, did I have that in the process that I mapped out even as part of the goal? And if I do have it, am I willing to get through that? Like, if I really because believe the person that's telling it to you. I think it's Daniel Gilbert has that book, Stumbling Upon Happiness. He said, we don't actually know often what's going to make us happy. So the best thing is go to someone who has already, has that thing and ask what it's like. So for example, my wife and I are actually planning on moving this year. Yeah. So like, it's a big thing. So we've lived on this farm and it's been a wonderful time. It's a little too rural for us. So we're looking at places where we can be more in the action.
Okay, well, I still need to come there before you guys move away from there, because
please come.
It looks amazing.
Please come this year. And yeah, we have goats and we have chickens and all of that. So as we're looking to move, we've narrowed it down to a couple places. So we're looking at Burlington, Vermont. We're looking in Dover, New Hampshire. So both in New England. And so one of the biggest things we're doing is asking people there, like, what are the pros and what are the cons? And then trusting them. But actually, like, they know because they're there. Right? As long as you get enough of a sample size. And so it's the same with goals, actually asking someone who's achieved it, what is it like to have this? Or what was it like doing this strategy? Like, okay, you decide to go all in on Facebook ads. Like, what's the hard part about that? What's the great part about it? Do you like it? What's important for you to do as you're figuring it out? Now that you have the dip, you really need to make a decision. Am I willing to get through the dip? And this is Seth Godin's concept. He has a book called The Dip, which the hypothesis or the theory of it is the rewards go disproportionately to the best in the world. If you're at the top of a field, the person at the top gets miles more rewards than the person who's in second or third, right? The person who's the best surgeon in the world for whatever type of cancer gets paid proportionally more than second and third place. It's just not linear at all. It's not even close. But if you want to be the best in the world, there's going to be a dip. There's going to be a dip to become the best surgeon in the world. So once you've looked at these goals and ideally found someone who can give you some insight on them, figure out what's the hard part, and then really decide, like, is that worth it to me? Because one of the powerful pieces about setting quarterly, monthly goals is that it helps you stay disciplined, because when an opportunity comes up, you say, no, I got to stick with this goal I have. But if you didn't foresee the dip, it's very easy to quit in the dip, and then you've wasted all that hard work, right? There's no point starting something that you're not going to, get through. And so you need to very quickly assess, what's the dip? Am I willing to get through it?
And Greg shared a little bit about when he was a wrestler, that gave a really easy to understand example of this. So maybe you can share with them that.
I don't remember it.
Okay. So basically it was like, when you are trying to become the best wrestler, there's going to be, cutting weight. You are cutting weight. And that's not fun. You're hungry and you're working hard and you're tired.
Oh,
and you're like, I want to give up.
Yeah. So, and this even bridges to another point. So, my freshman year in college as a wrestler, was very successful as an All-American in high school, went to college, and I was going back and forth behind another guy for our weight, right? There's only one starter per weight. And I didn't know week to week whether I was going to be the starter. But the catch is that in wrestling, at a high level, everyone's losing weight for the matches so that you can be kind of the strongest for your body weight. And it's kind of actually become a negative thing, because it's like, now if you don't cut weight, you're at a disadvantage because everyone else is cutting weight. So they're going to feel a lot stronger or heavier at that same weight. So it's okay to cut weight if you're starting, because you have that thing to look forward to. You're on. And it's okay to not know if you're starting if there isn't that much sacrifice, right? Because you can kind of deal with the uncertainty. It's very difficult to both deal with uncertainty and to do something hard and to take action, execute. And so the way that relates to things like quarterly reviews is it's very hard to both try to make your Facebook ads work, for example, and be wondering if you should be doing Facebook ads. It's like very easy to quit if you both aren't certain, and it's a difficult thing to execute. So if you can separate those things apart by making the decision, then going into execution mode and knowing I'm going to evaluate at the end of the quarter. This isn't forever. That allows you to get through the dip.
Yeah. So basically when you want to quit because it gets hard, you can't really quit at that moment because you've decided that you're going to finish. You have to finish. And at the end of the amount of time that you said that you were going to give yourself, that's when you can decide if you're going to change what you're doing. Like, for example, with Facebook ads, it is very difficult at the beginning because you're spending a lot of money. Some people, you don't have to, but most people that go all in when it comes to Facebook ads have to spend a bit of money at the beginning. And when you're testing, you're not really getting results. So it feels like you're wasting money, when in reality, you have to go through that testing phase to get to the success phase. Because if you don't test, you could be missing out on a better ad or a better combination where you could be making more money. So you have to go through that very uncomfortable stage of spending money to test out different types of ads, different strategies for it, different graphics, etc., for you to get to that. But it's very uncomfortable to watch yourself spend money and not get results.
Yeah. And it's easier, and that's a wonderful example, because it's easier if you know the dip. If you know that that's the dip, you can be like, okay, right? Like, I hired a Facebook ads person recently, and she was like, all right, for the first whatever, I forget what it was, first month, 2 months or whatever, like all my clients kind of freak out because they're really tight on their budget and they're not working yet. And so, you just gotta gut that out, right? So it's much easier if you know that. And then you can assess it later, because it still may not work. Like, the thing may not work later, but you've established long enough. So at least you've gotten through the dip, and is this just a dip, or is it what Seth Godin calls a cul-de-sac? It's actually not going anywhere. It's like one long dip that you never get out of, right? And that's important to know too. Oh, this isn't, I'm not in the dip. It's just a cul-de-sac. It's a dead end.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because if an ad's not going to work, then you do need to realize when is the time, like how much time do I need to give it before, like if you're even just testing an ad, you're really only giving it, I would say 48 hours to decide if it's a good or bad ad. But then if you're testing your entire ad strategy, you're probably going to give it a month before you actually come back and say, is this working or not? So
and that's exactly what it was like for me, because she had told me we were a month in, it wasn't working. And I was like, all right, I know the dip. I made the commitment. Then 2 months in, when it's still not working, it's like, all right, we got to change. It's not working. We got to change it. And another great example was I did a live event last year. It was my first live event where we, not just a retreat with a few clients, but renting a venue and all of that. And I remember 8 weeks out, I had 5 people enroll. Like, it was just like, I was freaking out. And the event strategist that I had hired, Patsy, I called her up on a Saturday, because she's great like that. And I was like, I think we should just not do it. Like, let's get out. This is a disaster. Like, it's going to be so embarrassing. And she's like, you know what, Greg, I'll support whatever you do, but just know that every one of my clients says the same thing 8 weeks out. So oh my God, how comforting is that there's an end to the dip, because then you can deal with that. And I think that's a lot of our value as coaches too, is just letting people know this is normal. And look at this person who's on the other side and they were in the same spot. And I just want you to stay in it long enough to let it work and trust the process. Because if you keep switching every time you hit a dip, you never get out of the dip. You just do a lot of different things in a mediocre way.
Yeah, that's a perfect, that is exactly what happens to every one of my clients when they do a launch, right? If you're launching a program, everyone joins at the end. At least 50% of people are going to join at the end, at least. And so it's very uncomfortable. Some people, I've had clients that didn't have any clients that joined during the process, but they filled their program on the last 48 hours. So a lot of people are like, oh no, I'm not going to finish it. I had a client who hired me a week before her launch finished. And literally she's like, I'm not going to finish it. And I was like, oh yes, you are. You've already gone through this entire process. You're going to finish it. Now you have my help. And she filled her program, but most people quit at that moment. I don't have anybody signed up. Something's not working. I'm not tweaking while I'm going. And then I end up just giving up on it. And now you have to start from the beginning. So I definitely wished that I had that when I was going through my dip when it came to hiring a team this year. But I didn't have that perspective because I feel like I didn't have a community. I'd never seen anyone go through what I was going through. So I definitely think there's value in even just hearing that it's normal.
Yeah. And people have done it before. So just figuring out what is normal. You gave me the example when we were just talking a few weeks ago about that. I think it was a Tripwire offer and how that page was converting. And you're like, oh, I'm going to take it off. And then someone else is like, no, this is the goal. Like this actually.
I actually did take it off.
So
I literally spent 8 hours taking it down because I thought it wasn't converting.
Right.
And turns out that 4% is the average industry standard for a Tripwire. And I was like, what? Mine was converting at 8%. And I was like, I already took it down. I had to put it back up. It was terrible. But again, I didn't know that that was the industry standard. So I didn't have anything to gauge if this was something I should have left up. Now I know, and I tell people that all the time, but we all have to go through those experiences to find out that like something is normal. And this is like what you can gauge your expectations on.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to, it's a ruler, a benchmark. So know the dip, right? The takeaways, know the dip. And it just as a final example, sometimes there's a dip when you get to the later, more advanced stages of something. So when people start lifting weights, they typically gain muscle very, very quickly. I mean, you can gain, like 20, 30 pounds in a year of muscle for your first year of lifting. And then you start to lose those, they call like them newbie gains, right? So it starts to level out, right? Your body's sort of adjusted. It's at a good level of strength. And then even, I'm like 10 years into lifting. So it's like really slow, right? But if I don't know if that's normal, right? Like if I think, it's a linear progression, I'm going to keep getting stronger. Then after a year, I'm just going to quit because I'm just like, well, obviously, I'm not meant to gain muscle versus if you know that that's what it's like for everyone, you're like, all right, now I just have to decide, am I happy at 80% competency with this? Or do I want to have more mastery over it? Like, can I get excited about gaining like a few pounds of muscle a year type of thing, right? Is that worth it to me? And so you can actually make educated decisions. And so I'm sure there's examples in business where you might have something start off really quick and then it might level out for a bit. And, you kind of have these jumps that come every once in a while, but it's not going to always be the same rate of growth.
Yeah, I definitely think like in the first year of growth when you don't need to scale. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I said last year, I just wish I could go back to a one-man show because it was so much easier back then. Like, you are also making all the money, you're able to adjust, but there comes a time where you can only do so much more. There's only so many hours in the day and there's only so many jobs, even if you are scaling. Like most of my business is automated, but even still, there's still moving parts when it has automation that like, if I wanted to grow it, I would still need to invest more time than it would have taken me back in the day to automate things.
Yeah. And I think the 6 to 7 figures is the ultimate example, right? That we're living right now is like, I reference Seth Godin a lot, but he talks about there's a local maxima and a global maxima. So people can look this up online, just search Seth Godin, local, global maxima. But, things go up and there's a mini peak, which we could call like 6 figures. Like you have freedom, you're actually getting paid. You're able to, fund a decent lifestyle. Like you have your decent, income. And then there's a dip and it actually gets worse for a while, but then it goes up to a higher global maxima, right? Which is like, I really have a scaled business. And the key is like the goal isn't necessarily to get to the global maxima. You need to decide if you're happy with which one do you want, and know that here's the dip that's required to get to a global maxima. But for a little while, it might have actually been better to just stay at 6 figures. It was a really simple business and it was working.
And I also think it was like a question of identity. Like I loved when you talked also about the identity thing. It's like, I thought I was above that. I thought I'd already done all the mindset things about, am I enough? Who am I? Can I really do this kind of thing? And then you get to this like new stage where I was like, am I this person? Do I even want to be this person? Is this something that I saw myself doing? And like, is it a goal that I just did because it was like, oh, that's what the people do next? Or is it a goal that I actually want? Like, do I want to be a CEO of a like empire, right? Or a global corporation? Like, do I want that? Or because like there are things about it that I'm like, I don't really like that. Like, I don't like having meetings. I don't like managing people. I also don't necessarily know if I would want someone coaching for me. Like that was a big difference that no one really talks about, is like that you have to have people do things instead of you, which I never even considered. When you grow your business, like that means that I can't be the one to provide these services to everybody, which is not like, people talk about like scaling, automation, ads, like things like that, but no one talks to you about like, meetings with your team and also having someone do the services that built your business for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't even really have anything to add, but I think that it's bigger isn't necessarily better for everyone. It depends on what you want and the experience that you want. Although, if you're someone who's into growth, it's kind of inevitable because, what's the alternative? Like, you're just going to stay at the same level the whole time. Like, if you're interested in growing and personal development, it doesn't really matter if you like the 7 figures more technically, but you're going to like the process of growth. So you kind of just eventually do it anyway.
And for me, when I started my business, it was never about making money either. So I think that at the beginning, especially because I was making money in my job, so it was very hard for me to be like, why? I like doing this for free. I don't really need to make money. I'm making money in my other job. So I had to shift my own mindset because it was never about making money for me. It was always about helping more people, helping people have a better result. And so even now, when I think about 7 figures, I don't think about 7 figures in terms of money. I think about how many people that means I helped.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's different metrics, right? There's money, which, obviously if it's money, you should continue to scale. If it's impact, you should continue to scale unless you feel that some way scaling will actually take away from the depth of impact, which is possible in certain businesses. There's freedom. And you can make the argument either way. There's freedom in a lean business. There's also freedom when you don't actually run the business. Your job, as Seth Godin would say, is to break the business. Your only job is to be the visionary and change things when you decide they need to be changed. And then there's, I think this is my main driver, is just autonomy in the work that I get to do, which is similar to freedom, but it's really doing work that you enjoy and is harnessing your strengths and feels really meaningful to you. That's personally why I started my business.
Same.
And
that's why, because my job wasn't giving me that.
So you can same here. So you can certainly do that in a 6-figure business. But for me, that's one of the main motivations for scaling, because I know that I'm still having to do some work that isn't meaningful and isn't really in my kind of zone of genius. Right. And so, but at a 7-figure business, you can really figure out what's the work that I can do and only I want to be doing. And then I can really have delegated everything else. And if the work that's really meaningful to you, we've talked about this, but I feel like if the work that's really meaningful to you is one-on-one coaching, I don't think that that's at odds with a 7-figure business. You just got to make sure that, other people are doing the other things, et cetera. So.
Yeah, that's definitely been for me, because that's what that's why Greg and I were talking about it, was because Greg isn't doing one-on-one coaching anymore. And I always think that that's why I got into this industry, was because I really do enjoy it and it really does energize me. And I know that most people, it doesn't energize them. But for me, I feel like I take my one-on-one clients and I actually just remove that entirely from when I plan my business or strategize it, because that to me is that's my passion project basically, is I enjoy that. And that's just a bonus for me that I get to do that. And having the space and time, and I only take on dream clients. So having the space and time to be able to do that is important to me, just as playing golf is important to me, or going to yoga is important to me. Having that time in my schedule to have those couple of clients is important to me. But when I strategize my business, I just remove the one-on-one coaching entirely. I don't even plan that out.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, because that's I consider that to be my passion project of what I enjoy. And I think it is important to me to be able to have the space and time to be able to do that, so that I don't have to and even I've had more than 5 clients before, and it's too much for me to be able to do everything that I want to do outside of that. So I've found that only 5 is the perfect amount for me to be able to still do all the other things in my business that I want to do. But certainly recognizing where and how you want to scale and what's important to you, because people have told me not to do one-on-one, right? I hear that at least once a week from someone, that I shouldn't be doing that. It's not scalable, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't do it for the scalability. I do.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter because they're not the ones who have to live in your business, So, it's interesting. I even want to build on this a little bit. I remember listening to so many different podcasts and stuff, and everyone's talking about unique genius or zone of genius, unique ability. There's different words depending on the person who's teaching it, but it's all basically saying, as an entrepreneur, you want to be doing the things that you have an advantage in, right? And then delegate the things that you don't really have an advantage in, someone else can do them just fine. And ideally even assemble your team so that it's their advantage, the thing that they're doing. But no one really says like how to figure that out. Like they always say like you should do, what's the thing that gives you energy when you do it? What's the thing that you're good at? And that can help. And if you really put some thought into it, you can figure out what it is. What I found very useful, and it wasn't designed for this, but Jonathan Fields, who has Good Life Project podcast, he put out a free quiz called the Spark Type Quiz. So Spark, ETYPE. And it's actually more designed to say, what's the role that's sort of in your DNA that you love to do, and just build a life and career around that. But for entrepreneurs, I think is especially helpful because it really gives you actually what your unique ability is. And so, for example, I think I'm going to get this wrong, there's about 10 different spark types. And each spark type is sort of fundamental to you. So they're not a role you're in like a coach, but there's something that you can do in multiple roles, but they're a part of that role. So for example, mine is called the Sage, which is about teaching, right? So you love to share your wisdom in a clear way, and you love to see people have those insights and do things easier and have a shortcut. And so I actually found, as part of my coaching journey, that I'm a good coach, but I wasn't like an amazing coach. That wasn't my unique ability. My unique ability actually has to do more with teaching and training and laying things out in a really good stepwise process for people. And I had feedback. We had her as a guest trainer today in my mastermind, Lana Dingwall. When she was in one of my early programs, she said something like, Greg, you're the best teacher that I've ever had, including like official academic things. And that really made an impact on me, because I'm like, well, I'm not really teaching that much in my business because I thought I was a coach. So after she said that, I was like, I need to start doing programs that have me teaching more than coaching. So that's when I created Coaching Business Bootcamp, which is my course, and things like that. And that lit me up a lot more, and it provided a lot more value for the people in the programs.
And it's interesting to me that this is coming up right now, because I've literally had a similar conversation about like the difference between coaching and consulting, like at least 3 times this week. So I'm thinking like, I think a lot of people get into coaching thinking that like coaching is teaching, and in fact, they're quite different. Coaching is when you're helping the person find the answers from within themselves, and like you're just asking questions to help them dig deeper. Whereas consulting or teaching, training is actually giving them the answers. And obviously everybody wants the answers, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that it's going to be the right answer for them. But when someone hires a business coach, quote unquote, that what they think they're getting is the teaching and training. So it is important as a business coach or a coach in general. Most people are not going to be very happy if you just say to them every time, well, what do you think? Right? What do you think?
Yeah. And I think you're most powerful if you can do both. Like if you have a tool set that really helps someone tap into what they want and how they want to do it. Because if otherwise they're just not going to have the energy and that spark to actually do it. Right.
And it might not always fit. So that's exactly where I was going with this. Is like, I think it's very important to have both.
Yeah. And then also you have a plan exactly on the other side. Now, this is my stance, is that the earlier on someone is in skill development for the area that you coach in. So say you're a business coach. If you're working with people who are starting their first business, it's nice to have a little bit more teaching and training side of it, because they just have no schema. They have no framework on what to do. So every session you're going to ask coaching questions, but they're mostly just going to be like, right, but can you just tell me what to do that's worked before? Because I don't even have anything to go off of.
I literally had this conversation with a client this week, because she had been working with a coach who was very coach-like. And I was like, so do you have a payment processor in place? And she said, no. I'm like, but how can you take a payment? Like, you need to have something in place to take a payment. Like, that's not a position for a coach to be like, well, what do you think you should do? Like, give them the answer, like, so that they can get some clients in, like little things like that, where I'm like, yeah, they definitely need someone to tell them what to do and not just say, what do you think?
And now on the other side of it, other end of the spectrum, the person who's already started 10 businesses, and made a ton of money, like they might need more of a coach, because they already have a lot of learnings to go off of. They just need your help sorting out what's their way to do it and what's the new way to do it. So that's sort of how I see it. You're powerful with both, depending on the types of clients you work with, you might want to bring one or the other. But the most important thing is just getting in your lane, because like for me, because I'm more of a teacher than a coach in terms of what I'm really great at and what I love to do, it's just not as efficient to coach people. Because what's going to end up happening is I can be the coach, but it's not a great use of my skills and it's not a great use of the context. If I'm a better teacher, it's much better to be creating trainings that a bunch of people can do at once, because otherwise I'm just kind of teaching one-on-one, which isn't a great use of that one-on-one context. It's better to just coach if you have that opportunity to really customize it. So that's sort of, and I suspect that a lot of the people in the online business coaching space that are doing really well are more teachers, which is why they have more scaled programs. Although you do get the really high-end, more boutique, like prosperous coach style businesses that scale with a few super rich, clients. But
well, I also think though that what ends up happening, like at least in the programs I tend to gravitate towards now, are that the content is something that's on there. It's available for you. It's probably a video or a training or something. And then the coaching is actually the live stuff, like whether it's a live event or it's a live call or something like that. Like the coaching is more the live part, but they're not going to be teaching you. I mean, I do teach live, but there's like live trainings rather than like a coaching call. Is like, I just like separate the times.
I agree for the most part. I do think there's value in teaching live because then you can really make it interactive. But I know that you meant that as well. So so take the spark type. And it'll give you your primary and your shadow spark type, I think are the two names. So my primary is Sage, the teaching aspect. And then my shadow is advisor, which is actually more of a guide, which is like more of a coach, right? And so once you know your shadow sort of supports. This is the way I understand it. It's weird to like present Jonathan Fields' thing, like it's my thing now.
Well, I mean, honestly, like sometimes I take things from A Course in Miracles and just make them my own. So I'm totally down with what you're making your own.
Full credit to him, but I think it'll be extra
we'll link it in the show notes.
Useful for these people. So, the key with the shadow spark type is you'll do it in service to your primary. So actually the reason I coach is because it makes me a better teacher, because I get to see individually what works really well and where do people get stuck and how do I help them through it. So now I can make a more scaled curriculum, right? And so I'll do the advisor and I've become very good at it, but it's in service to the Sage aspect, the teaching aspect. So that's really helpful as you're building a business to know this stuff, because now I know I can delegate a lot of things, but the teaching aspect, creating the curriculum and ideas, and to a certain extent, some of the advising, like working with those clients in a more intimate context, are going to be the things that I should be focused on and not let go of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Because like I was even thinking that myself, that when I coach people, like that's how I get all the ideas. But I know also like Greg, you're like very good at like exploring and adventuring through how to do something. And I more explore and adventure maybe either on my own for my own business or like with my clients. I like learn so much from them. So like that's generally how I come up with the content I make. So it totally makes sense that like that's how we're exploring and also supporting.
Yeah, what gets me super excited, I feel like the reason I'm here is just to try stuff and explore and discover and test stuff out, and then see if I can codify it and see if I can just teach it in a clear way. And I think Tim Ferriss is almost similar. When I like read Tim Ferriss's stuff, I think he's similar in that regards. Like he really seems to get a lot of energy and a lot of his businesses based on him, like, creating the shortcuts and teaching backwards after he's experienced a lot of different variations and messing stuff up.
Love it. Love it. So what about in terms of like daily habits in order to stay in those, to stay focused, to stay in our lane, to stay in our zone of genius? How can they implement like daily habits that support that?
So here's an example. So in my weekly review process, there's a bunch of different things that I do. But one of the things I do is I choose 3 to 5 MITs, most important things. So right, there's this concept of do the most important thing first thing in the day and don't stop until it's done. Right. This is kind of the main, if you only had one productivity thing, it'd be like do a chunk of focus work at the beginning of the day on the most important scary thing, right? Not the comfortable thing. And so that thing should be high leverage, highest leverage for you, which could be different for different people. So if I know that I'm a sage, if that's my spark type or that's my unique ability, then that's really good to know, because now as I'm assigning most important things to myself throughout the week and choosing those 3 to 5 things, it helps me filter and say, what are those things I should be spending the focused time on? And then I can actually block that off on my calendar, and that becomes part of the daily habit of doing that thing. And I think forget the authors there, but they have the book called The One Thing, which is like the same deal. You should have the one thing that's your thing that you're best at, that you need to focus on, and you should do that in the morning when you're not distracted. So that would be an example of a habit of how we translate it.
I love that, because, I tend to leave the most important thing till the end, because I always think that I'm most creative at the end, but I think it's more so that I actually want to go to bed, or I'm like, okay, I really have to get this done before the day is over because I said that was my one thing.
There's something to that too. I always feel like you have to make the strategies work for you, and that may be the way you do it. And there's science supporting creativity in the afternoons. Daniel Pink's book, When, right, says do your analytical stuff in the morning and your creative stuff in the afternoon. So if the most important thing is a creative task, it makes a ton of sense to do it in the afternoon, assuming you're a early bird or in the middle. Assuming you're not a night owl, then kind of all the schedules sort of shift around for you. But
yeah, I tend to be more of a night owl, I think, but I think it's just because I got into the habit of golfing during the day and then working at night, or because I was working during the day and then doing my business at night. I don't think I really ever got out of that habit.
Yeah.
But I love focusing on one thing, because I think as an entrepreneur, there's just so many things. And a lot of my clients will ask me things like social media, oh, do I have to do that every day? That takes up so much of my time. And I'm like, that's not the most important thing of the day. So if social media doesn't get done every day, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to get done every day. How do you feel about social media?
Yeah, I'm not on Twitter. I don't have Instagram on my phone. I technically have an account, but I'm not active on it right now. I don't know even what the others. Snapchat, never been on.
I don't use Snapchat either. I'm more of an Instagram or Facebook. I'm I don't really use the other.
I do some Facebook, but honestly, not a lot. Now some people have built great businesses on utilizing that audience, even just on their personal Facebook, which is awesome. But for me, that's not my main hub. So that's not the thing that gets me clients necessarily.
Nope, I don't think it gets most people clients.
So that's the important thing to know. And so as you're establishing a most important thing, especially if your priority is cash flow right now, and that's definitely going to be the case if you're earlier on in your business when you don't have leeway, just getting clients. So what's the thing that's closest to getting clients? So I like to think about it concentric circles. The middle thing is I got a client, a client paid me, right? So what's one ring out from that is being on a sales call with a client, right? So the more sales calls you're on with clients, the more you get paid by the clients. Then we go one ring out. What are the things that generate sales calls? Right? So it might be putting out an offer to your email list, building a webinar, whatever it is. So now we're one thing out. So those are still relatively high leverage, right? If that's where the bottleneck is, if you don't have enough sales calls booked. If you already have some sales calls and sales leads, what you need to focus on is closing the leads that you have in your pipeline, right? So, but then we go one out, and it's creating a blog post, right? That's important. It could lead to your audience, which could lead, you could tap into that to get sales calls booked. But we're starting to get further out from the center, right? And even though writing a blog post could be scary, it may not be as scary as putting yourself out there in other ways. And then we get way to the outside circle and we're designing a logo, right? It's totally cool. Branding, actually, I think branding is poo-pooed in our online space, It's you don't focus on branding, just do direct marketing. And there's power to that. But also the biggest companies in the world focus a lot on their brand. There's a reason for that. But it's way out in the circle, right? So that's not a good thing. That would be a creative avoidance for people who haven't seen my work. A creative avoidance, you're doing the thing on the periphery, right? And the outside of the circle, it's far away from the high leverage thing that you really could be focused on that's actually going to grow your business. And so designing a logo would be an example of something way on the outside of the circle. And the things on the outside of the circle, you're allowed to do, right? We all probably need a logo at some point. It doesn't have to be amazing, but you got to earn it, right? You got to earn the things in the outside circle. So that's what I always tell my clients. They're can I revamp my website? I'm you can definitely revamp your website, but what I want you to do first is reach this income goal that you set. And then once you've earned it, then you'll have some space, cash flow wise, to do the longer term stuff. Because as we get out in the circle, that's longer term, right? Short term wins are in the center, long term stuff on the outside. But you can only think longer term if you're on top of the center things. And so it's all this balance, because if all you ever do is close existing sales leads, you'll just be in a constant, hamster wheel. You got to keep closing sales, keep scaling, because you haven't created any assets that help those come in and help those be pre-sold. So yeah, I don't even know why we started this, but
I don't know, but that was amazing.
Creative avoidance on the outside of the circle, earn the stuff on the outside of the circle by being consistent on the inside of the circle.
Love it. So if there was one thing that you wish more people knew about you or about online business or about being a coach or anything, like what is something that you wish that you knew or you wish more people knew?
I wish people knew because we talk about this a lot, but really got that if you don't love the process, you have nothing. If you're building your business in a way that necessitates reaching the goal in order to be fulfilled and satisfied, you won't be satisfied, right? Because you either not reach the goal or we're just in a constant process of setting new goals. So I wish people could really get, and this last couple of years have been years of the process for me. And when you start loving and focusing on the process, we've talked a lot about goals because they're important for direction. But when you start doing that, not only you're happier during it because you're like, oh, okay, I finally get it. It's just about, can I get the most out of this day? And that'll just naturally lead to my goals. But it's under your control and it actually does something. Having the goal doesn't do anything. It's just written down. A lot of other people want to have great businesses. You didn't really do any heavy lift there to write the goal down. It's the things that you do every day. And so if it's the things you do every day that gets you the stuff you want, then you need to learn to enjoy the things you do every day. And so that's not just a mental trick of like, okay, how do I just be mindful and enjoy it? Choose things you're going to enjoy. Right. So I have this thought, we can link to this in the show notes, but I have this quiz for your archetype. It's not your spark type, but your coaching archetype. Right. And so this is within a coaching business. What are the ways that you could generate leads that would be most aligned with your strengths? This is now the marketing piece. And there's 3 archetypes: connector, maven, salesperson. They have to do with, I stole them from Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. And if you're a connector, you're going to enjoy spending your days more developing referral partnerships, as an example. That would be a good strategy for you. There's lots of ways to get clients, but for connectors, they're going to enjoy that. And for mavens, like I'm a maven, you like to teach, you like to share ideas. So content marketing is going to be a good strategy for you. You're going to enjoy that. You could be the best at that in your niche. For salespeople, you really need to be in sales conversations. You need to be running webinars and workshops. You're very persuasive and you're charismatic. So and Facebook Lives are a great example. So there's so many options of things you could do. So if it's all about the process, make sure you've chosen a process that you could actually see yourself being consistent with and enjoy, because otherwise, just have a job. We're building the business so you can enjoy the business.
I love that because it's so true. Like you'll soon start to hate your business if you're doing a bunch of things that you don't enjoy doing, even if it means sales calls. Like a lot of people at the beginning don't enjoy sales calls. Me, I don't enjoy writing emails. But it's like learning to love the process of writing, learning to love like sharing ideas, or learning to do it in a way that you enjoy. Even just like shifting my mindset around that a sales call was actually a coaching call really shifted that, this is actually a coaching opportunity, which is something I enjoy doing. It energizes me. So this can be no different than, a coaching call, and it can energize me too. So sometimes it's about shifting your mindset around it. Sometimes it's finding a different way to do it so that it's actually enjoyable. Like I'd rather do a video than I would write a long article or a blog post or an email. So I'd rather just like invite people to a video and do the video, right? So find a way to make it enjoyable. Some things in your business are not always fun, but some things we have to do. Other things, if we're going to build a business around them, make sure that you enjoy them.
Well said.
Thank you, Greg. This has been amazing. I really hope to have you back on the podcast because I feel like there are so many topics that we could go into, but you've just shared so many nuggets of wisdom with everyone. I am so appreciative. And I know they will be too.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk soon.
How amazing was that? Thank you, Greg. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait for the next episode. If you loved this episode, let us know by taking a screenshot and posting it on your Instagram stories. Make sure to tag How We Hustle Podcast, tag me at Wholehearted Business Coach, and tag Greg at Greg Faxon.
And that's a wrap on another episode of How We Hustle. For more information, check out howwehustlepodcast.com.